Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the effects of COVID and how we as a generation are dealing with it. So to introduce the three of us, I'm Courtney Huggins. I'm the group treasurer for Logicor, where I lead group treasury, capital markets, and investor relations. I'm the deputy chair of the Future Leaders in Treasury group for the ACT, and I'm also on ACT Council. And I'll let the other two members of the panel introduce themselves now. Roshan, over to you.
Hi, my name's Roshan Tolkins. I'm Group Treasurer for Mantrak Group, based over in Dubai. I've been in the role for about 18 months. Look after territories around Sub-Saharan Africa, Iraq and Russia. Prior to this, I was at Reckitt Benckiser as Head of Treasury, again based in Dubai. Been in Dubai now for 6 years. Prior to that, in the UK, working for Burberry.
Hi there, yeah, Rob Searle, working for MUFG Bank down in Sydney in Australia. I've been down here nearly 10 months now. Before that, working for Barclays in London. I look after what we call our global subsidiary banking clients, so subsidiaries of all parents from across the globe that work with the bank. Been, like I said, been in banking for 9 years.
Great. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And I think we're lucky to have a panel from spanning across the globe at the moment. So I guess the first thing to just discuss is, COVID in itself is an unprecedented crisis. And with both governments and corporates having to face into the situation head on, it's really interesting for me, and I think for our peers, to see how things are panning out and sort of to be reflective of our experiences, specifically with COVID and also possibly before COVID, because the last crisis we had of this measure, even though COVID is completely unprecedented, was the global financial crisis in 2008, where I think most of us, or many of us, weren't actually in the Treasury world yet. I, for one, was still in uni in 2008, finishing up my archaeology degree. So I think it'd be really interesting to know where you guys were during 2008, either in the beginning of your careers or not yet quite verged into the Treasury world yet.
Yeah, so from my side, I was just finishing up university, so finalising my chemistry degree, not actually entered into the world of Treasury yet. So I didn't actually start my Treasury career until 2010. So kind of on the tail end of kind of the crisis. So certainly interesting times to experience now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And similar to me, I was not working at that point in time. I was actually just coming towards I'd finished university. I was just coming towards playing the end of my tennis career, actually. So certainly a different scenario now. And the most interesting thing actually is hearing anecdotes about it that have been popped up around the office and across the media that you sort of hear about. That's sort of the closest I'm coming to it right now.
Yes, and number one, I want to hear more about this tennis career after this call. But also, I think for me, it's really interesting to think about, when I first went into Treasury, although it was in 2009, it's almost like a thing of the past already, the crisis. I mean, we learned about it through the ACT, but I don't think my group treasurer was talking to us about it that much. It was sort of like it's past, we move on, and there wasn't this sort of preparation for the new generation of treasurers coming into the industry from a practical, hands-on basis. So I think we'll talk about that a bit later. But maybe just to focus on the two areas that we're going to discuss today. So I think the first is the business and how the business reacted and how we as treasurers have had to react. And then secondly, later on in the discussion, we'll talk a bit about the softer side of COVID and the effects it's had on mental health and how we work and how we think it will change the way we work in the future. So firstly, I think I'd like to ask how your business has reacted. Logicor, for one, we were quite lucky in that it turned out we had great BCP planning. The IT department and also the Treasury department had a very, very good setup. So when it finally came time to work from home, there weren't any hiccups. the hiccups we found in the last sort of month or so have been in businesses that haven't had that setup, that robust VCP planning, and that obviously affects the supply chain. So, Rob, how did that affect you, and how did your business initially react to that from a bank perspective as well?
Yeah. So I think the banks are pretty well set up for working from home, which is ultimately where this has ended everyone up, right? We have disaster recovery sites, some people in the office and some working from home, but the key was the technology being working. And I think, I speak for MUFG, but I think most institutions from a banking perspective have had the ability to work from home, especially for relationship managers. I think that the only thing that's being prevented at the moment is the ability to go and see clients in the flesh, which is, I guess, a big part of the role. But I think we've very quickly learned that the new norm is very easy to deal with. So from my perspective, the difference has just been the working from home all the time, as opposed to just on a sort of an anecdotal basis. So that's been difficult to some regards, but it's becoming normal now. So I think the bank was pretty well set up, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and I think from my side, I felt going into this situation quite well prepared. I think as a business, we're starting to put measures in place, well before this crisis started. So I think aspects around having VPNs available, means to work from home, business continuity planning around the TMS, aspects around that have been working very, very well. I think as well, from a documentation perspective, we're all trying to move digital. So, things like manual payments have kind of moved well away. We're doing a lot of things electronically, things like drawdown requests from a business perspective as well. We're working with our banks, quite a while ago around accepting scanned copies rather than originals. And some of our banks have been very supportive on accepting things like DocuSign. So really kind of moving into that virtual level, which is fantastic. I think in some of our territories we may have been more effective than perhaps where I'm based in the UAE. So countries that I'm looking at, in regards to like Iraq, Sierra Leone, where bandwidth isn't as good to start with. There are some challenges in those markets, but I'd say when you look at things as a whole, we're surviving very well, and probably ahead of the curve, I would say, versus some of the other companies within Dubai and the world, to be honest.
No, absolutely.
Just to add to that, I think it's moving. It's sort of fast forwarding the need for the ability to do stuff online more, right? So people have been, especially banks, been talking about it for a long time, about the desire to digitalise. Right? It's been a buzzword for goodness knows how long, but it's actually, this is force the hand a little bit, and I think that could become a positive out of this sort of terrible situation, right? So that's been something that Roshan just mentioned, but I think it's really in evidence at the moment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we'll probably end on how we think this situation is going to change the way we work and the way that society is going to kind of function in the future. So, but that's a great point. So thank you for going through how your businesses initially reacted. And what I'd like to hear next is how you initially reacted. So when you first realized the extent of the crisis, and I think as treasurers, we're built to immediately catastrophize in a way, to be the most risk averse we can, to prepare for the worst case scenario. So when you first realized this was all happening, did you feel prepared as a treasurer from a personal perspective? Did you feel prepared as a treasurer from a technical perspective of what do I do, considering we were all in university in the GFC? And then what were the actions you first took? I think for me, it was little things. It was, again, catastrophizing and going to that worst case scenario. The banks all can't, it's not working. It can't function. We can't do online payments. How do we get a fax over to people? Getting electronic fax machines set up for everyone. Those little things to keep the wheels on the bus. And then also it was just liquidity. So how about you guys? Roshan, would you mind jumping in first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I feel that my 10 years of Treasury has actually been building up to this a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but when I was at Burberry, everything was around what happened in the financial crisis. How do we ensure our cash is protected? Looking at counterparty limits around that perspective, using high-rated banks, and as well as the systems. So that was a second TMS implementation I was involved in, and that was all about making things digital. And they were already ahead of the curve then, with their shared service centres and aspects around that. So I felt that I had a good grounding. I feel that the ACT qualifications, MCT helped with the technical piece.
Yeah.
And now it's like, right, we need to put it into practice and make sure that everything we've been talking about, everything that we've learned actually works. And
yes.
I think so far so good. I think, there was a bit of, I would say, panic mode, because now it's like, right, okay, this is real life. What do we now do? We need to test everything. Can we work from home? Now, are the right controls and measures in place? So, even before we went on lockdown in Dubai, around about a month before then, we were having kind of crisis committee meetings, with the CFO and the wider leadership team around what plans we need to put into action. So things like texting that we can work from home, VPN connectivity is working, not only in Dubai, but also around the group as well. So I think these sort of plans worked well, and it was good to have that reinforcement. I think the biggest challenge maybe was the cultural aspect. Okay, so and what I mean by that is that there's definitely, I would say, a generational thing around. If you're working from home, well, you're clearly doing other things, watching the latest Netflix dramas and all these other things.
Yeah.
There's always a stigma around it. But I think once we've been working from home, in the first week, everyone was like, this is 12, 14-hour days. We're seriously working hard for the business, trying to keep business going. And after that, you could just see that the stress had died down a lot, because people knew that their peers, their colleagues, their team members were all working and pushing in the same direction. So I think that was very, very positive from that perspective as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, there's been days when I've been jealous of people who have just been able to watch Netflix all day, because it is, especially, the spotlight is on Treasury at the moment. So our teams, in addition to the commercial business, are having to work harder than ever and do that with sort of IT resources that can be challenging at times. Rob, what's your experience, Ben?
Yeah, so from a banking perspective, the key, there's two parts to it, right? There's the internal and the external. So the external being making sure that we're communicating up front with our clients, right? It's a pretty well-known situation at the moment, like you said, where liquidity is absolutely key, cash is really important. And so, making sure that we're communicating with our clients to understand their needs, where they are as a business, where they're impacted, just to understand more than ever what's going on with them. But that's been sort of the primary external targets, right? And as you guys have just alluded to, it's stuff that all Treasury teams are working on. The subtle difference here, I guess, for me, has been working with the subsidiaries. That they have, depending on the setup they've got, whether they're centralised, whether they're decentralised, how interactive they are with their Treasury teams at head office will depend some of their needs. But nonetheless, it's just been critical from a communication perspective to make sure that we're on top of what's going on. And then internally, I think there's been a big, I don't think so much a huge change, because banks, I think, have been, at least for the whole time I've been in banking, there's been a focus towards the requirements of capital, and you two will have definitely heard that conversation from your bankers over the years. Yeah. And so banks have been gearing up for this for however long, with making sure they got the right capital aside and making sure that they're lending responsibly. So this is put into action for what banks have been working up to for a long time, and this has just really highlighted it. And so again, internally, it's very much been driving communication around what exposure do we have to our corporations, and how can we support them, where do we want to support them, and just in some instances having the open conversations that have been demanded for quite some time, but now that the open conversation is a necessity because of the situation that corporates find themselves in. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess now, having been a few weeks into the crisis and working from home, do you feel like you're still in crisis mode, or your teams have moved and the business has moved into more BAU? And what's your focus now for Treasury after the first few weeks have passed?
Yes, so I think it's a bit of a mix, I would say. I mean, there's a lot of BAU activities obviously still ongoing. We still need to make sure that we have enough liquidity to keep the business running. So obviously cash is still king around that perspective. Obviously making sure that, we're looking after the general treasury risks around FX, and as well as, the operational side of things, making sure that, we're still secure, we've still got the controls going through. There's a lot of BAU from that perspective. We're also going through an RCF refinancing. So despite what's actually happening in the market, we still feel that there's opportunities around that perspective, and we want to try and keep that traction going. I think where we're still in crisis mode, I think is the sensitivity analysis and the scenario planning, which is still going on. So I think, the specific business at the moment, Mantrack, we had some, similar aspect going on in 2015, 2016, where, we had effectively the oil crash, and there were a lot of aspects happening in Russia, devaluation in Nigeria and Egypt. We had Ebola in Sierra Leone. We had ISIS in Iraq. So we had all of these things all going through. So our sensitivity and scenario planning is kind of ongoing, but I think it's been a little bit more fast-tracked. And certainly for us, we started putting in measures as soon as the oil prices started going down, just almost prior to kind of the COVID situation as well. So this is where I'd say we're still in crisis mode. We're still getting very, very close to the business, ensuring that we're tracking our forecasts, things around covenant, debt management, very, very fast tracked around that piece. But we're starting to feel like this is a bit of a new normal. So, it's going to be strange actually being back in the office and seeing people again. But we've now found this balance, and I'm not seeing any change in my team in the way that they're working. It's still, there's been no lag around that perspective. So you could almost call this the new BAU to a certain extent. It's that kind of balance around, things are moving a bit quicker based around crisis mode as well.
Yeah. And I completely agree. I think liquidity and sensitivity analysis and looking at cash flow is definitely the new normal crisis mode that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. My team is continuing to work on a few projects. We're reviewing our FX process internally throughout the group. We're also doing a cash management RFP. So that's a pretty chunky piece of work that we're trying to run and complete this year. And it's fantastic to see that the team has been able to be robust not only in their skills but mentally to keep things going and do the crisis work and now continue to do BAU and push on. Rob, what have you been up to then, and what's your team's focus, and how has that shifted throughout the past few weeks?
It's probably identical to how Roshan started, right? Which is obviously it started out crisis mode, and then now crisis mode has moved into, okay, this has been going on long enough now where this is sort of normal, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that it's still having a major effect. Just in, I guess, in Australia, the wider economy is, forecast to go into a recession for the first time in, I think, over 27 years or something, right? So it's that is not normal for the country. So that has to be addressed, and clearly that has a knock-on effect on how the banks operate and how they're gonna interact with their clients going forward. So from our perspective, we've been, as very diligent about making sure we're aware of what's going on, but at the same time, you still have to run the business as usual to make sure that you're still working with your clients where you wanted to previously, and having the same conversations that you were having, but just obviously with the cloud over the head of this pandemic that's taking place. So the mixture is fast becoming the norm, and then it'll be interesting to see in a few weeks or a month's time or however long it goes on for where this lands. And I think that the strangest thing for us now will be the going back to work, right? We're actually going into the office, and there's already been a couple of banks that have come out in the press and said, well, actually, maybe we don't need to have all these office space. Actually, it's going to probably save us a load of money not having it. So how that evolves is another question for months down the line. Actually, it's interesting. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think we've all agreed that liquidity and cash and that planning is going to be key in the foreseeable future. Rob, you just mentioned recession in Australia. Roshan, you're still going through refinancing. How has your business responded in regards to liquidity? Speaking to some of peers, banks, colleagues, I've seen that a lot of businesses have, even though they don't need the liquidity right now, drawn down completely on their RCFs, or gone out and gotten additional liquidity facilities as a backstop, just in case things are far more severe than expected. Have you seen that with your business or your colleagues, or speaking to your banks? Roshan, what's been your experience there?
Yes, similar. So we've got a revolving credit facility which we drew down on around about 75%, just to ensure that, we have cash in our hands, and we can effectively be ready for anything that's upcoming, in terms of paying suppliers and aspects around that. I think also from a business focus perspective, we're looking at, again, the importance of actually having cash coming in. So, in terms of, when we're now selling to our customers, we're ensuring that, we're getting things like non-refundable deposits in, aspects just to kind of protect the cash coming in eventually. And I would say, there's always been the credit control aspect around that. But, the due diligence, I think, is becoming even more stringent around that, because, great, you can make hundreds of millions of sales. If you don't get the cash coming in at the end of it, then that can potentially impact your net working capital in your business later on. So I think we're being more careful around who we sell to, and effectively ensuring that the cash will come in, and ultimately we're not putting too much of a strain in the business from that perspective as well. But also there is an importance around our suppliers and ensuring that we're continuing to pay our suppliers as well, because it goes around across the whole supply chain. You can't just protect your own business. You've got to protect everyone around you. So I think we're quite, that's definitely in our thought processes around how we can all pull ourselves together. Because if our customers aren't around and our suppliers aren't around, then we're not going to be around either. So we need to very, very much think about the bigger picture around that.
Yeah, absolutely cyclical. And you make two great points there. I think the first being, credit quality of your customers. And that's been a huge focus for our business now. Our finance function has been doing detailed analysis on tenant credit quality, because we're a logistics firm. So we rent warehouses. And then also just the overall supply chain. If you're a larger business and can help to support smaller members of that supply chain, it ensures everyone's continuity. So I think that's a fantastic point. And generally just being a good corporate citizen as a business. And I think that's a huge reputational impact to doing things like this, or to not doing things like this. So no, that's a really fantastic point. And Rob, from your perspective, from a bank perspective, having a lot of your clients draw on their committed facilities at the same time, I'm sure can put pressure. Speaking to my relationship banks, candidly, they're all saying that it does put pressure on the bank. I mean, how are you responding? How's the bank responding? Or how are your peers in the same industry responding that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think banking as a whole is, like you said, it's pretty well known that all banks are at the moment seeing a ton of their facilities drawn down, right? And that is to be expected in circumstances like this. I think the key for the banks is the planning of it, and that's what's most important for them. But many corporates, as you guys have said, have got different debt maturities, which they spread out over many years to try and mitigate the risk of that occurring. And I think, again, as I said a little while ago, banks are have been gearing up for this for quite some time. So we've been, making sure that we're lending to the right corporates that relate to the bank, and making sure that, business case and credit case always stack up. And that's, that's even more highlighted in this scenario. But no matter what sector the clients have been working in, the point that Roshan was highlighting there has been, an important conversation topic. Whatever sector they're in, whether that sector's booming because of what's taking place, or whether they're struggling, or whether they're just sort of maintaining the status quo, the working capital cycle, the supply chain and the such like is critical to all of them, because they want to be good corporate citizens, but at the same time make sure they're getting cash coming in. So those conversations have been taking place across all clients, across all sectors, is my view. There's a very subtle difference as well between the domestic banks and sort of the foreign banks as well. And I can't really speak too much on that because I don't really know a whole lot of the detail, but different bank, if you've got a retail base of customers, then that changes how it operates as well, right? Because you've got to look after the smaller businesses and the retail customers versus some of the, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how your banks are differing between if they've got a retail presence versus if they haven't, because that's changing the way that they're probably operating in some regards.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting from a corporate perspective to see all of the things that were put in place and the safeguards and the controls post 2008. It's really putting them to the test, and I think the banks are responding really favorably. And here in the UK, you see in the headlines, the banks supporting businesses such as M&S recently to make sure that these core businesses to the economy do have liquidity. So it's fantastic to see. I think we're going to switch tact slightly now and start talking about the softer side of the effects of COVID. And one of the biggest changes, which we've already talked about, but not so much in detail on this call, is working from home, and how it's affected us, how it's affected our teams and the overall business. I, for one, have found it really equalizing and also really interesting to see my colleagues who I see in the office every day in suits in the background with their kids. It's very humanizing. I think initially it was a transition for everyone to get on board with working from home. And there's certainly been, for everyone, a change in mental health and how we deal with day to day, not seeing each other, not interacting with people. So how has it affected your team specifically and you personally, if you're happy to talk about that? Rob, how about we start with you?
Yeah, I think the transition was odd to start with, just because you're sort of working at home all day. My wife's at home doing her stuff in another room, so there's sort of you learn more about other businesses than you did know previously. That's the first thing that's been a bit odd. But other than that, I think the key, again, I sort of said it a few times, but the communication aspect has been very important. And as a team that I work on, I don't manage anybody individually, but I do work, as part of a team, and just making sure that we communicate more than we ordinarily would actually not more than we already would, but I guess making sure that we communicate lots about not just, the conversation isn't right, we're into work straight away. There's the sort of chat that you do have at the office, right? Because it, at the end of the day, they're colleagues, but it also, you do have relationships with them. And so it's important to remember that you don't want to just jump straight into, right, let's talk about what we've got to do from a business perspective, because that's a little bit cold. So for me, it's worked pretty well. Like I said, the banks, or this bank, MUFG and other banks, I think have been setting up for the working from home for quite some time. It's the stigma that now, as Roshan alluded to, that there was a stigma associated to it for quite some time. Sort of Friday, someone's working from home. Does that mean they're in their garden? But the reality is, no, people are working. Right? They're just getting on with stuff, and it's working pretty well, I think.
Yeah, you bring up two great points. One which I want to address later, which is working from the garden. So I think we'll cover that in a few minutes. But communication, absolutely key. And one of the things that for millennials, which we are, is that I feel like I'm in constant communication with people via WhatsApp or Instagram. And what I've tried to do for my team, I've got 10 people across 2 different countries, London and Luxembourg, is we've set up a WhatsApp group. We do have calls together as a group every other day. When it's someone's birthday, we have birthday drinks, we celebrate, and we do send around funny stuff on the WhatsApp group, bit of banter, and I think it keeps everyone really happy. And you can tell when people are struggling because they'll reach out on a video call instead of just a normal call, and we've been trying to do video calls as much as possible, face to face, feel like we're having some sort of human contact, and that's just within my team. The business in general has been doing fantastic work around having weekly events. This last night we did yoga, we had a cooking class, we've done a dance class, which was hilarious, seeing some of the senior members of staff in sweatbands and really getting the groove on. So I'm really proud of our business personally, and I can tell that people around the globe are doing the same thing. So Roshan, what have you guys been up to then in terms of working from home, how it's affected your team, and what you've put in place to maybe make that a bit easier for everyone?
Yes, I mean, I think from a personal perspective, I think in my previous role, I'd work from home, I would say 1 or 2 days a week, just given the time zones I was covering. So for me, I have a preference to at least have a few days working from home at least. I mean, I've actually found it quite efficient in the sense that, of course, at the moment we couldn't really go outside much, so people know I'm at home and available. but actually it's been quite efficient in the sense that I actually find myself doing longer hours at home because you don't have the commute to work, and you're focused a lot more on that aspect. I think what we've done as a team, so kind of the wider leadership team, so our CFO has basically put in an hour call every single day, either at 9 o'clock or 1 o'clock, just to catch up. And it could be that there's some times where it will last 15 minutes. It's just checking in, making sure that everyone's fine. There are other times when it will last a full hour. We've got a lot of things to talk about. And that's almost like, the sort of water cooler conversations you'd be having. Just catching up, understanding how the business is going on. And I've done the same for my team as well. Like yourself, Courtney, I've got teams in multiple locations. So making sure that, there is a resource readily available to actually have these conversations, discussions, checking in, making sure that, everything's in order is really, really important. And I think the motivation actually is quite high. I think, within my team, a lot of them have families at home. So whether it's a cat, a dog, kids, that sort of aspect around it actually makes it feel quite homely and they're not alone. But I think where we have been trying to focus a bit more is, where someone is living on their own, where there is, within an apartment, there's no garden. They're the sort of people that we've been checking in a little bit more on. And specifically in Dubai, we've now, so the lockdowns has been effectively released a little bit. So we're now allowed to have up to 30% in the office now.
Okay.
So for our, we actually then prioritise people that basically need to be in the office. So a lot of our admin staff have got in where they need access, to the photocopier or, to the delivery driver or something around that aspect. Or the logistics team that needs to be in the warehouse. Yeah. And then we try to focus on individuals that are living on their own, or that may have, 3 or 4 children in the 2-bedroom apartment where perhaps, it's a little bit too chaotic. So we try to kind of find that balance as well. But
that's a fantastic approach. That's a really fantastic approach, is focusing on the people whose mental health might be at risk the most because of their situation. And I think you bring up 2 great points. It's communication from senior management. You said your CFO is putting in calls every day. Ours has done the same. But I also feel like senior management have come together really cohesively within our business to communicate to us what's going on, updates in the business. It's forced something fantastic to happen, and I think our the staff really appreciate that. And then likewise, coffee, sort of, when you go to the kitchen to get a coffee and you bump into somebody and you don't really have that interaction with people outside of your team anymore. So we've been trying to implement coffee table chats or coffee chat, whatever you want to call them, where you just have a quick catch up with someone you might not usually catch up with outside your team. So that's a really good use of time as well. And I think, you were just saying, sending people back to work whose mental health might be most affected. And that's one of the biggest things I've seen come out of the ACT in terms of sort of the softer side of Treasury is the focus on mental health and that awareness. And it's been a real priority for a lot of businesses throughout this time. How have you managed during this time? I don't know if you can talk about your team anymore. I know we've just touched on it. I've had good days and bad days, frankly, where sometimes I'm feeling great, really positive, and then other days I'm just going, wow, I'm tired of this lockdown. And what's really interesting is, as a manager, and I'm sure you guys find this as well, both you with your team, Roshan, and Rob on the client side, having to put on a brave face for clients, it's making sure that the people around you and your stakeholders don't feel that, especially when you're managing a team. How have you guys dealt with that? And Rob, if we could see how you...
Yeah, I think I can only speak about the team that I work in, and we are, we, Australia and New Zealand, on the sort of markets that we've got within my team. So we have our calls, and everyone seems pretty upbeat at the moment, but you are right. There are days when, I'm sure there are people having more difficult days than others, and the same way you do when you get up and go to work in the office as well. So I think for the most part, I've been pretty fine with it, and it's become the norm. But I think you're right that the interaction is important. Just sitting, picking up the phone. I know certainly in the banks, I'm sure it's the same at corporates, as they say, well, don't send an email if you can pick up the phone, or if you can go and speak to someone. And it's even more pronounced at the moment with, just your inbox can fill up so quickly with emails and emails and emails. If you can pick up the phone to speak to someone, first of all, it's better conversation, but secondly, it's probably, it saves clogging up inboxes and means that there is actual interaction taking place, which, everyone really likes, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And Roshan?
Yes, I think, everyone has good and bad days. I think, when you're trying to lead and set examples, I think, you do have to put on, I would say, not necessarily a brave face, but keep up the the drive and the passion around what we're doing. There was days right at the start of the crisis where literally I had a 15 or 30-minute gap the whole day. And then when you're doing these meetings after meetings, it's keeping up that drive, that enthusiasm, because it is infectious at the end of the day. If you're down in the dumps on the call, then it can easily rub off. So I think I probably had to make more of a conscious effort, I think, because I'm not seeing people personally, where they are getting that FaceTime or video call, that the right message is being said across, and we're keeping spirits high, because it is a tough time, and everyone's in different situations. I know, I think in here in Dubai, I think there's certain families that that they'll have live-in help and aspects around that, but in other countries, UK specifically, where we've got both mum and dad working at the same time, trying to manage these things. This is where having the spirits up and trying to coordinate is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think it's been really humanizing, as I said before, and people have been much more open about how they feel. Maybe not during the fact, but after the fact. If I've had a bad day on Tuesday and I'm on a call with someone on Wednesday, and I can tell they're not, functioning at 100%, I try to say, try to get your daily exercise. I had a bad day yesterday. Just being honest and keeping that open communication. And I found that my manager and more senior members of staff have been really honest about the challenges they found with managing childcare at the same time as working. Especially for single parents. I've super people, super moms, super dads trying to manage school, entertaining their kids, and being senior members of a major company at the same time. I can't give enough, appreciation to them for what they're doing right now. So I think it's just being honest, and then that allows more junior members to keep that honesty, and that's really important. So I guess for my final question, and I think, Rob, you've touched on this more than anyone at this point on the call, is how do we think the crisis is going to change business, how we function as a business and as teams in Treasury, and just as a society? I think one of the biggest things we've talked about was working from home. You mentioned working from the garden on Friday, and would that be such a bad thing if we're getting our work done? If it makes the staff happier, more productive, and communicative, would be giving people the freedom to work from where they need to work, as long as they're getting their jobs done, a bad thing?
Yeah. I think that the future after this will certainly lead to a bit of a more thought about it. And Roshan has said that he's already, in his previous role, did it a couple of times. And I think especially for people that work across time zones, whether it's in a corporate or a bank, this has been great, because Australia's on a different time zone to most places, and not a little time zone, right? So, there are scenarios where I speak with colleagues in Europe, and actually since I've been working from home, it's just become a lot easier, right? You can do your whatever you need to do, and then join the call at 8 o'clock in the evening, and you don't feel like you've been working all day, but you're more productive. So it's certainly, I think, will change the way that bankers, especially global banks, interact with one another. Which will be, I think, a positive. I don't think from a business perspective it will change a huge amount, because I think this is just, again, most banks have been preparing for these sort of scenarios for quite some time, and it would just reinforce the message that they're trying to deliver to their corporates. And I think that's, whether it's a good or a bad thing, I guess time will tell. But I think that's the sort of the route it's taking, and then the final part will be that, what will it actually do to the markets as a whole? What will happen to the economy? And again, only time will tell. But the immediate aftermath is going to be a little bit ugly for some sectors, and we're already seeing that with some companies, unfortunately, going into administration, or at least really struggling. So I think it's going to be, banks are playing a role in that. But again, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out over the sort of forthcoming months.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from my side, I mean, I think it's been positive. I mean, if you can have a department like Treasury managing to do everything remotely in a crisis like this, then it shows that anything's possible when it comes to managing businesses and having people working from home. So I think there's a lot of positives around it. I think going back to your question, Courtney, about whether it matters if you're working from a garden or, I mean, I think as a manager, you know when your team are working, you know when the output's there. So
Yeah.
if the job's being done, it's being done. And I think as well, what Rob was saying about the work-life balance, I think actually people are actually starting to feel a bit better, because it could be that, you know, you need a half-hour gap during the day and then you jump on a call late at night. Again, it's work's being done. It's just a little bit more flexible. And I think a lot of our professional careers, the work and life do merge quite a lot. You know, so in Dubai, you know, we do Sunday to Thursdays. But most of the countries I look after also work on a Friday. So from that perspective, there is a big merge between work and life. So I think this is just another extension of that. So I think it's all positive around that perspective. And I think going forward, I think corporates will start to look at a little bit around, you know, having it as some kind of benefit for their staff. I think if corporates come around and say, well, actually, you know, you can do your job and I'm very happy for you to work 2 days from home, I think that'll be a big positive for corporates attracting millennials to join their organisation. And when you look at things like childcare, if you can save a day's childcare every single week, there's a financial impact around that piece. There's less commuting going through, so hopefully we won't be as crammed on the tubes getting to work, you know, if more and more people take this up. So I think there's a lot of positives that come from it. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we'll be always working from home 5 days a week. I think there needs to be that balance, and that social interaction, liaising with other departments is very, very important as well. But I think, you know, hopefully, you know, senior management and director level management, once they've seen how their teams can operate in these sort of crises, should be able to see that, you know what, it's not that bad. We can do it for 1-2 days a week quite easily.
Yeah. And balance is the right word there. Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up. I just want to say thank you to Rob and Roshan for joining us today from across the globe, late at night as well, Rob. So thank you so much for your time today and your input in the conversation. And thank you for everybody who's joined us today in the conversation. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to the ACT. And thanks again for the ACT for giving us this forum to discuss such an important topic today. So thank you, and we hope to see you soon.